Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on an epic chronological journey, tracking the absolute greatest superpower the ancient world ever knew, Rome. And the Romans didn't just stumble into an empire. Their very foundation, which was built on this wild myth of twin brothers nursed by a wolf, was the ultimate indicator of a culture that was inherently martial and just ruthless from day one. We're going to trace that exact path, from those bloody origins all the way to its dramatic, world-altering collapse. So here is the central mystery we are unpacking today. How exactly did a relatively small, local Italian republic manage to expand so aggressively that it transformed into a sprawling, global empire? And perhaps more importantly, why did an entity that powerful, a state that seemed literally invincible, ultimately fracture and fall apart under the sheer weight of its own ambition? Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the blueprint of the Caesars, we have to look at the soil it was built on, an 8th century BC settlement deeply steeped in myth and blood. Our timeline kicks off way back in 753 BC. And the Romans absolutely loved a violent origin myth to justify their expansion. The story of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers abandoned in a river, nursed by a wolf, which ultimately ends in a brutal fratricide where Romulus kills his own brother just to name the new city after himself. Well, that isn't just a story. It perfectly foreshadows the ruthless ambition that would define the empire's entire existence. But Rome's true test wasn't internal, right? It was Carthage. This sparked the massive Punic Wars rivalry. On one side, you have Carthage, famously led by Hannibal, who executed the terrifying, unprecedented logistical nightmare of marching actual elephants across the Alps to invade Italy. He won devastating early victories like the Battle of Cannae, but Rome pushed back hard under the brilliant general Scipio Africanus. The decisive moment finally came at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. Scipio absolutely defeated Hannibal, and that massive victory officially left the Romans completely in charge of the West. Section 1. The Rise of the Caesars, from Republic to Empire. Nobody, and I mean nobody, embodies this crazy pivot better than Julius Caesar. After ruthlessly subjugating the Celtic tribes of Gaul and forcing their leader, Vercingetorix, to surrender at the grueling siege of Alasia, Caesar's exploding popularity made the Senate sweat. They ordered him to disband his army. Instead, Caesar makes a choice that permanently changes history. He outright defies the nervous Senate and marches his army across the Rubicon River. Bringing an army across that specific stream was an automatic death sentence for treason, but Caesar did it anyway, effectively plunging Rome into a massive civil war. So, Caesar wins that civil war, of course, and claims the absolute title of dictator for life. He wielded immense power, passing out citizenship to allies and fundamentally restructuring time itself by giving us the Julian calendar, which is basically the same calendar we still use today. But as it turns out, dictator for life was a rather short-term gig. This absolute power completely terrified the Roman elite, and his reign came to a bloody end in 44 BC when he was stabbed to death on the Senate floor by his own friends, including Brutus and Cassius. Out of all that political chaos following Caesar's assassination, steps his son, Octavian. Octavian systematically defeated his rivals, including Mark Antony and Cleopatra, to become the undisputed ruler of the Roman world. In 27 BC, he was officially named Augustus, becoming the very first Roman emperor. This fundamentally transformed the state. And it was also during Augustus's reign that he sent out a decree for a massive global census to tax the world, a historical event that forced a young couple to travel to Bethlehem, leading to the birth of Jesus Christ. Section 2. Peak of the Empire. Maximum expansion. You really have to consider the stark contrast in leadership during this era. Emperor Trajan pushed Rome to its absolute geographical limits, aggressively expanding the borders all the way from Britain in the northwest down to the Persian Gulf in the east. But immediately following him, Emperor Hadrian faced the nightmare of actually managing an empire of that size. Hadrian's focus shifted from expansion to desperate containment. He literally had to build a massive physical wall in Britain just to stave off revolution and keep the peace. The empire had simply grown way too large to easily control. Section 3. Cracks in the Foundation, Division, and a New Faith. The administrative breaking point finally hits with Emperor Diocletian. He looked at the vastness of Roman territory and realized a pretty terrifying truth. The empire was simply too huge for any one person to handle. So his desperate solution was to deliberately break this massive entity apart. He split the territory into 4 supposedly manageable pieces, creating a new system called a tetrarchy, literally just so the state could survive. But listen, dividing the empire politically, that was really just half the story. The cultural foundation was about to experience a tectonic shift. Before a pivotal clash at the Milvian Bridge, the story goes that Constantine the Great looked up and saw a vision of a cross in the sky, accompanied by these profound words, "In this sign, conquer." The impact of Constantine following that vision was just staggering. He had his soldiers paint that Christian cross directly onto their shields, and wouldn't you know it, he won the battle. From there, he triggered a massive cultural revolution. He passed the Edict of Milan, officially granting Christians religious tolerance for the very first time in Roman history. And perhaps most shockingly, he moved the entire center of imperial power away from the city of Rome, establishing a brand new capital in the east that he named Constantinople. This wasn't just a strategic relocation, it was an absolute earthquake for the Roman psyche.
Section 4. The Final Collapse.
Now this fall, it wasn't some overnight event. It was a devastating cascade. Starting in the late 2000s, the empire fractures. That structural weakness attracts predators, leading to the unthinkable in 410 AD when the Visigoths sack Rome itself. This domino effect of foreign invasions and internal failures just cascades downward until the ultimate breaking point in 476 AD, when the very last Western Roman emperor is deposed.
The real catalyst for so much of this chaos was a group known as the Huns. These were incredibly fierce nomadic warriors, so terrifying that they were literally called the Scourge of God. According to the sources, they were supposedly taught to ride horses at 3 years old. Sweeping in from the east, the Huns became the ultimate domino. Their brutal advance pushed other desperate tribes right across the borders and deep into Roman territory out of sheer terror, creating an unstoppable wave of mass migration and invasion.
And all that pressure just built up and cooked until it finally exploded in 410 AD. Driven by the chaos, a foreign army, the Visigoths, actually breached the Eternal City. They sacked Rome. I mean, try to imagine the utter paralyzing shock of this moment for the people living there. For 8 full centuries, no foreign enemy had touched the city. Rome had projected an aura of absolute invincibility. And suddenly, the gates were broken and the city was burning.
The final blow in 476 AD carries this almost unbelievable poetic irony. It began in 753 BC with Romulus, the mythical founder, nursed by a wolf, and it died in 476 AD when a Germanic general named Odoacer turned against the government and deposed the very last Western Roman emperor, who happened to be a young boy named, ironically, Romulus Augustus. And just like that, the Western Roman Empire was gone.
Section 5. Rome's Eternal Shadow.
So the crucial point here is that a story this massive doesn't just disappear. While the political entity of the Western Roman Empire completely vanished into history, its deep foundational legacy fundamentally shaped the modern reality we live in today. I mean, Roman laws became the structural basis for European justice systems. Their Latin language formed the roots of basically half the world's modern vocabulary. And their infrastructure, their roads, aqueducts, and urban planning, literally paved the way for modern civilization.
We might not answer to a Caesar anymore, and the legions may have long since marched into the history books, but make no mistake, the empire is gone, but we are all still living in its shadow. The blueprint of the Caesars still forms the foundation of the very world we walk on today. Which leaves us with one final massive question for you to ponder. We've seen the sheer scale of the empire, the internal divisions, and the external invasions, but what do you think was the real reason Rome fell? Was it the ambitious generals, the sheer unmanageable size of the borders, or the fierce outside invaders? If you enjoyed this explainer and this deep dive into history's greatest superpower, make sure to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and please share your own historical theories in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.